This is BBC One in the East, and now the BBC News with George Alagiah and Amelia Reynolds at 10 o'clock.
Financial crisis or not, the government announces swingeing cuts in the fight against climate change. An 80% reduction in Britain's global warming gases by the middle of the century. But at the same time, Gordon Brown says he wants the cost of petrol cut. That could mean more driving and more emissions. We'll be asking if there's a tension between the issues of today and plans for the future, also tonight. First it was the credit crisis, now it's fears of a global recession. Yet more reasons for a volatile market.
I can only use one word to describe it, and that is carnage. I have never ever seen such fear in dealers, traders.
Their final head-to-head debate, but who on earth is Joe?
Joe the plumber.
Joe the plumber.
Joe. We're talking about Joe the plumber.
Joe the plumber.
Joe the plumber.
Thousands relive Britain's Olympic glory, an ovation at Trafalgar Square and a visit to the palace. And marking a milestone in British aviation.
I'll be reporting from Farnborough, where they're celebrating the centenary of British aviation. My great-grandfather, Sam Cody, made the first flight in Britain here on this day in 1908.
Here in the East tonight, jail for the man who murdered his own son and prompted the dying teenager to say it was an accident. And the rush of betting that sparked match-fixing allegations.
Good evening. A credit crisis that's far from over and a recession which may be around the corner. That's the time the government has chosen to tie Britain to one of the toughest targets on greenhouse gases anywhere in the world. The new climate change minister, Ed Miliband, says Britain will reduce emissions by 80% in 40 years. But minutes earlier, Gordon Brown was calling for cheaper fuel prices. As Roger Harrabin reports, boosting a faltering economy while trying to cut emissions is a tough ask, and one that the rest of the EU has failed to resolve.
It's a climate of fear, financial shocks, melting icebergs. Politicians are being told they can't ignore either. Today, though, Europe's leaders backed off trying to deal with both at once.
Mr. Speaker, the government...
But the UK said it would go it alone, with cuts of 80% in CO2 by 2050.
In tough economic times, some people will ask whether we should retreat from our climate change objectives. In our view, it would be quite wrong to row back, and those who say we should misunderstand the relationship between the economic and environmental tasks we face.
Today's decision was broadly welcomed by the Conservatives and Liberal Democrats, although they differ on details. But how do you cut CO2 to a fifth of its current level by 2050? Well, it'll mean a sea change. In the next 5 years, we'll need a massive programme of home insulation. There'll be a boom in renewable energy in people's houses. The government promised today to pay more for green power. There'll be more incentives for heating with wood. Within 10 years, new rules will have to be imposed to make gadgets like TVs use less power. We'll need a huge expansion of renewables, particularly offshore wind. The employers' organisation think it's all achievable, just.
It's an enormous task, and we are not on the right trajectory to achieve it yet. It's going to require an enormous effort by business, developing new innovation in products that are low carbon, and it's going to require the consumer to be prepared to put their hand in their pocket.
Within 20 years, we're likely to have nuclear power, so long as there's not a nuclear disaster somewhere. Buildings will be built with wraparound solar film. Coal-fired power plants could be built, but only with technology like this demonstration plant in Germany to capture and store their CO2.
It's very hard to imagine, with a commitment in law to cut the UK's emissions by 80%, how the government could continue with plans to build a new generation of coal-fired power stations.
Within 30 years, oil will probably be banished. We'll be driving electric cars running on low-carbon energy. Some cars will run on hydrogen. Within 40 years, well then, we really are into unknown territory. But how about the short term? Today in Brussels, the backslapping among Europe's leaders concealed a failure to agree details of a package of CO2 cuts by 2020. Gordon Brown is urging major CO2 reductions. But what's this? He's also talking down the price of petrol.
It is encouraging that we have seen petrol prices fall in the UK in recent days, with some supermarkets reducing their prices below £1 a litre. But I would like to see other retailers following that lead.
Cutting the cost of petrol may be popular, but it will increase demand, which in turn will increase emissions of CO2. Governments between now and 2050 will face countless dilemmas like this. Reducing CO2 by 80% was already an immense challenge. Fears of the recession make it truly monumental. Roger Harrabin, BBC News, London.
Well, dealing with climate change may be a decades-long battle, but tackling a failing economy is a much more urgent task. For the world stock markets, the threat of global recession appears to have taken over from the credit crunch as the #1 fear. Share prices across the world have been volatile. London plunged to a 5-year low, while New York staged a recovery. As Hugh Pym reports, it's just one sign of the uncertainty out there.
Another nail-biting day for dealers on the London stock market as they saw the index of leading shares plunging more than 5.3%. Fears of world recession had spread across time zones and global markets. In Tokyo, the main stock market index tumbled more than 11%, the biggest one-day fall since 1987, as the government said it was planning emergency budget measures. Hours later, New York was opening with share price falls following the big drop last night. But the Dow Jones average closed up more than 4.5% after a highly volatile session. Signs of an economic downturn are becoming clearer. This Chinese toy factory has cut right back on staff numbers. Half of China's toy makers have gone out of business as orders from the US and Europe are axed. At GM's truck plant in Detroit, 1,000 jobs have already gone. It was announced 1,500 more will be cut at other factories in the GM empire. And the steel giant Chorus, now owned by Tata of India, is to reduce production in Europe.
All the indications are there. You've only got to look, for example, at shipping freight rates. There's been a massive collapse in demand for shipping chartering, which suggests that exports from the Far East and elsewhere are going to decline. Commodity prices have been falling rapidly. There's no doubt that a recession, a global recession, is coming.
So on the London market, all the gains made on Monday and Tuesday in the wake of the bank rescue deal have been wiped out. And the FTSE 100 index of leading shares is now below where it was 5 years ago. There are continuing fears that the reluctance of banks to lend to each other will choke off loans to the wider economy just when it most needs it. So the Bank of England has unveiled new initiatives to try to get money flowing more freely around the system. For example, allowing banks to go privately to the Bank of England to borrow money without the fear of damaging public speculation about their financial well-being. It's all about liquidity, that is cash. Banks are hanging on to it. The Bank of England's trying to top up the system and get the banks to allow it to flow freely to outside borrowers. But the authorities say it's a temporary move and mortgage lending will never go back to what it was during the borrowing binge.
What we've seen over the last year is lenders widening the gap between what they charge people with a good deposit and what they charge people with a small deposit. And of course, anybody who hasn't got a 10% deposit or 10% equity will struggle to get a mortgage anyway. So it will definitely get more difficult for those people with a small deposit.
For city traders heading home tonight, there was plenty to think about after another nerve-wracking day at the office. Wall Street's late rally may cheer up the mood in London tomorrow, but with the violent swings we've seen in recent days, don't bank on it. Hugh Pym, BBC News.
And our business editor Robert Peston is here. Robert, markets up in one place, down in another. How do we make sense of this?
Well, it's quite difficult to say that there is reason behind this. You know, last night, Tokyo plunging 11%, an extraordinary fall. The British stock market plumbing depths we haven't seen for 5 years. Wall Street opens sharply lower and then bounces, up, 4 or 5%. at the close. I'm afraid investors are being ruled by fear and, they're clutching at straws. What's happening in America is that people this evening were slightly looking on the bright side. One of what most people would regard as the positive impacts of the global economic slowdown is a very sharp fall in the oil price. It's now more than half, or it's fallen more than half from its peak. Petrol's coming down, so investors think, well, if petrol's coming down, perhaps there's a bit more money in consumers' pockets. Perhaps actually US retailers will do a bit better, so the retailers in the US rose. Also, there was a bit of evidence that there might be maybe a bit of a bailout in the US of some hard-pressed insurers. But the one thing I would caution people, however, is it is possible that sometime soon we will see a bounce in stock markets, but it doesn't mean that we're over the worst economically. Investors in stocks tend to look a year, 2 years ahead. They will see through a global downturn. We could well be in a very serious recession and stock markets could be rising. So as I say, we shouldn't confuse what happens in stock markets with what's happening to jobs, to profits and to all our economic prospects.
OK, Robert, thank you. A British soldier killed in an explosion in southern Afghanistan has been described by his commanding officer tonight as one of the best of his generation. 21-year-old trooper James Munday, who was from Birmingham and serving with the Household Cavalry, was killed yesterday after a blast during a routine patrol in Helmand province. His parents said he died doing a job he loved. 7 friends who were on holiday with Kate and Jerry McCann when their daughter Madeleine disappeared have received £375,000 in libel damages. The Daily Star and Daily Express have apologised for allegations that the group had covered up the true facts concerning Madeleine's disappearance. Nick Hyam reports.
They became known as the Tapas 7, the friends dining with Madelaine McCann's parents the night she went missing. Today, 6 of the 7 came to court to accept damages from Express newspapers.
The defamatory stories written about us were not only extremely damaging on a personal level, but we strongly feel were detrimental to the search for Madeleine. Although we are very pleased with today's result, it changes little when Madeleine's plight remains ongoing. She is still missing.
The 7 are just the latest of those caught up in the media frenzy surrounding Madeleine's disappearance to win compensation for newspapers' mistakes. They've been paid £375,000, money they'll donate to the Find Madeleine Fund. Kate and Jerry McCann themselves were paid £550,000 by the Express. Robert Murat was paid £600,000 by 4 newspaper groups, and 2 of his friends, Michaela Walczuk and Sergei Malinka, were paid at least £100,000 apiece, a total of more than £1.7 million.
Here at the Express, they've apologised and accepted that the allegations were totally untrue. But why did this newspaper and so many others report so much unfounded speculation? The answer seems to be that they'd so little hard fact to go on. Unlike here in Britain, the law in Portugal bars the police and others connected with the case from speaking to the press.
Madeleine's disappearance from the Ocean Club in Praia da Luz led to months of headlines, but many of the stories weren't based on official sources. They reflected what Portuguese newspapers were publishing, and much of that, it now seems, was rumour and speculation without foundation.
News journalism, whether it's television or print, abhors a vacuum, and therefore they pile in with their own conspiracy theories and innuendo rather than allowing the truth to come out. So if the Tapas 7 had been allowed just to make a straightforward press conference to explain where they were in this whole sad and dreadful story, none of this would have happened.
Today, the Tapas 7 said they believe Madeleine is still alive and appealed for anyone with information to come forward. Nick Hyam, BBC News.
It was their final televised head-to-head debate before Barack Obama and John McCain faced the voters in 19 days' time. It was also their liveliest confrontation yet. Our North America editor, Justin Webb, watched the debate, and he's in New York tonight. Justin.
That's right, George. Before this debate, everyone believed that John McCain had to do something. He had to pull some rabbit out of the hat to reinvigorate his campaign. Nobody guessed, though, quite what that rabbit was going to be. It was last Sunday when Barack Obama met Joe Wurzelbacher and had the exchange on tax that the McCain people hope might change this election.
I'm getting ready to buy a company that makes about $250,000, $270,000, $80,000 a year. Your new tax plan is going to tax me more, isn't it?
Cut to the debate last night. Joe suddenly centre stage.
A couple of days ago, Senator Obama was out in Ohio, and he had an encounter with a guy who's a plumber.
It went on and on.
It's Joe Wurzelberger. Joe the plumber.
Joe the plumber. Joe.
We're talking about Joe the plumber.
Joe the plumber.
Joe the plumber.
The McCain point is that blue-collar Americans earning good money but who aren't rich stand to lose out if Barack Obama wins. After the debate, the McCain team were suggesting that in some key states, including Joe's home, Ohio, it's a powerful argument. But is it enough? Is this about policy now or temperament? Tens of millions of Americans have watched these debates and have had an opportunity to form an opinion not just about the policies of the candidates, but about their characters, their strengths and their weaknesses. And McCain's weakness, according to the polls, is his angry look. For instance, when he defended his campaign rallies last night with a passion that seemed somehow overbearing.
And I'm not going to stand for somebody saying that because someone yelled something at a rally. There's a lot of things that have been yelled at your rally, Senator Obama, that I'm not happy about either.
We can have tough, vigorous debates around issues. What we can't do, I think, is try to characterize each other as bad people.
It was a rope-a-dope strategy. McCain attacked, Obama parried, but wouldn't fight. The Democrat is playing the winner's game because with 19 days to go, he is looking like the winner, and nothing last night changed that. Justin Webb, BBC News, New York. And it turns out this evening that there are allegations that Joe the plumber is not actually a licensed plumber, and also that he might himself be behind with his taxes. Anything the Republicans try, anything the McCain camp tries, doesn't at the moment seem to be getting them anywhere, and that needs to change in the next 19 days. George.
Justin, thank you. And coming up on tonight's programme, 100 years of British aviation, a celebration for the first powered flight. Times may be tough in the city, but there was plenty of gold on the streets of London today as Britain's Olympic and Paralympic athletes paraded through the capital. Thousands of people turned out to congratulate Team GB on its performance at the Beijing Games. Tonight, the athletes have been at a reception hosted by the Queen. Here's our sports editor, Mihir Bose.
Today, the capital gathered to celebrate the unparalleled success of British Olympians and Paralympians at the Beijing Olympics, an occasion for uplifting sporting nationalism, honouring Team GB, which represented the entire nation, and a diverse spread of sports, capturing the public's imagination this summer. British sports, which often disappoints, exceeded all expectations. Winning 19 gold medals in a variety of events, Great Britain finished fourth in the medals table, the best since 1908.
It's gold for the 13-year-old Annie Simmons.
Our Paralympians achieved their biggest ever medals haul, finishing second behind host China. That may all seem a long time ago, but as the Olympic heroes made their way around London, thousands lined the streets to acknowledge their achievements.
It's just unbelievable, just incredible atmosphere. Everyone's so happy. Real positivity for a team, which is just incredible, really, really good.
It's a bit like weird looking back and seeing you like that, because I can't remember most of it. Like, most of it was just a blur because it was such a surprise.
Many more flocked to the nation's symbolic gathering point, where thoughts turned to how the success of Beijing could be a launch pad for London.
Britain often does not exceed sporting ambitions. Team GB did that in Beijing. But while we celebrate their triumphs, today must be seen as the beginning, not the end, as we look towards London 2012 and build on this momentum.
Money alone does not buy Olympic gold, but it helps. £235 million of public money went on Olympic sport in the run-up to Beijing, 12 million for each gold medal. For London 2012, the government promised an additional 100 million from the private sector. Little chance of that in the current climate. Now government and lottery are paying more, but there is still a shortfall of 60 million. All the athletes agree that public funding was crucial to their success in Beijing.
4 things, Mahir, came together. The first was just great governing bodies. The second, world-class coaching. The third, of course, ambitious, talented competitors. And fourthly, unprecedented levels of funding. The real challenge is to maintain all those 4 components for the next 4 years and beyond.
The day ended with a reception hosted by the Queen at Buckingham Palace. The challenge for British Olympics is to make sure there is even more reason to celebrate after London. Mihir Bose, BBC News.
A man's been found guilty of ordering a murder from his prison cell using a smuggled mobile phone. Delphon Nicholas was convicted of the murder of Andrew Wanago in South London in 2006. The Old Bailey heard that he made dozens of calls from inside Belmarsh prison. It's illegal for inmates to have mobiles, but thousands are in circulation. This report from Louisa Baldini.
Behind bars, mobile phones have become the hottest commodity, fetching premium prices.
My phone was on board for £500. Yeah, from £500 to £600-700.
Whereas calls on prison payphones are monitored, mobiles provide inmates the freedom to discuss their criminal activities. Smuggled in or even thrown over prison walls, they're mainly used to organise drug deals and to pay for them using telephone banking. In some cases, mobiles have been used for far more sinister reasons, to intimidate or even murder people. When Andrew Wanago was shot dead in southeast London 2 years ago, one of the suspects thought he had a cast iron alibi. He was securely behind bars the night of the murder in London's Belmarsh prison. But it was from inside the jail that Delphon Nicholas arranged Wanago's murder, using a smuggled mobile to ring his accomplice on the outside. The mobile phone used by Delphon Nicholas was originally smuggled into Wandsworth prison before being transferred to Belmarsh. Now, the exact numbers of smuggled mobiles isn't known, but the Blakey report in July estimates that 600 mobiles and SIMs are seized every month, and some say that's just the tip of the iceberg. The government's introduced body orifice scanners into some high-security jails to try to detect hidden mobiles. Sniffer dogs are also starting to be trained to find them. But there is another solution which could render all mobiles within prison walls useless. This is basically a jammer or a blocker, is it?
This module here prevents your phone from receiving the transmission from the tower.
So you've switched it on.
Switch it on. You're going to see in a few seconds.
But the little bars, frequency bars on my phone are now just going to disappear. Completely. And they've gone now.
That's right.
So I can't call.
You can't call and you can't receive a call. Properly done, jamming is like anything else. You can control it and make sure only the places where you want jammed is jammed.
Trials with similar technology are due to end in the Irish Republic this month, but progress is much slower in the UK.
The reason I believe that the government's dragging its feet is that the old chestnut of if prisoners are quiet and happy, then you've got a good prison service.
The government says it is trialling new technologies, but with mobiles already said to be at epidemic proportions in our jails, it will have to make some decisions fast. Louisa Baldini, BBC News.
It's 100 years since the first powered flight in Britain. On this day in 1908, an American adventurer called Sam Cody flew nearly half a kilometre in a plane he designed and built with the British Army. Cody also happens to be the great-grandfather of our very own John Simpson. He reports now from Farnborough on a milestone in British aviation.
It was a small but very real piece of history they were celebrating today. This is a replica of Army Aeroplane No. 1A, exactly as it was on the day its inventor, Samuel Cody, flew it here at Farnborough for the first time.
I've got a particular interest in Samuel Cody because he was my great-grandfather. It's amazing to think he could have had the courage to fly in a thing as flimsy as this. Nowadays, the health and safety people won't allow this replica to fly, but they weren't around in October 1908.
This is how his first flight ended up. It only lasted 30 seconds and covered less than 500 yards. But soon, Cody was flying for 4 hours at a time. He was a big, burly American in his late 40s, much older than all the other pioneers. His British wife Layla, my great-grandmother, became the first woman in the English-speaking world to fly. Cody was an affectionate family man. One of these girls is my mother. But research has shown that he had eloped with Layla, who was already married, with children. The children went with her, and I'm descended from one of them. Cody first came to Britain as a cowboy, and he had a Wild West show. He would shoot cigarettes from Layla's lips. In 1909, he became a British citizen, something he was deeply proud of.
It is an achievement, though, this, isn't it?
There was a familiar guest of honour at today's celebration.
Yes, it is. Oh, yes, it is. And it's a good day for us.
And soon the sky was full of famous British aircraft, following where Cody had once led. One plane in the flypast for Cody was flown by the Conservative defence spokesman, Gerald Howarth.
His was the defining moment when man first flew in powered flight in the United Kingdom, and there has followed a century in which Britain has excelled in aviation, both civil and military, and is a world leader, even to this day.
Because of him?
Ultimately, yes.
In 1913, 5 years after his first flight, Cody was killed in an air crash. But his achievements have never been forgotten. John Simpson, BBC News, Farnborough.
Well, there's more national and international news on the BBC News channel, but now we can join our news teams where you are. Good night.
Hello, I'm Amelia Reynolds and you're watching the Look East Late Bulletin. Our top story tonight, the father starting a life sentence after stabbing his son in the heart. Peter Farnborough dialed 999 after he was attacked. During his desperate call to the emergency services, his father was heard in the background, prompting the teenager to say it was an accident. This report from Alex Dunlop.
Peter Farnborough, a vulnerable 19-year-old whose life was just beginning, said detectives. And this his father, who stabbed him once in the chest during a row at their home in Norwich. He insisted his son fell onto a knife, but compelling evidence secured his conviction. After the attack, David Farnborough dials 999. Control asks, "Tell me exactly what's happened." "Well, my son's just had an accident. He had a knife stuck in him," he says. But Peter also called emergency services on his mobile. "I've been stabbed," he says. In the background, his father calls out, "Say it was an accident, mate." He then prompts him again, "Peter, say it was an accident." Seconds later, his son dies.
It's a damning reflection on David that having inflicted a fatal wound upon his own son, that as his son lay dying behind an unlocked door, he did not go to his aid, and whilst Peter lay dying, David was trying to fabricate a story to save his own skin. The family are left without Peter, and his father has been convicted of his murder.
A neighbour in Silver Road heard them argue moments before the attack in July last year. They had, the court was told, a fraught relationship. 4 years earlier, Peter said his father had tried to strangle him. Because he hadn't intended to kill his son, Farnborough, a former bus driver, could be released in 13 years when he's 65. In the short term, Peter's family will find partial closure next week, when after 15 months they'll finally be able to lay him to rest. Alex Dunlop, BBC Look East, Norwich.
Questions are to be asked in Parliament on whether a Norwich City game is in the middle of match-fixing allegations. It's thought the match in question was the Canaries' home defeat against Derby. Two Norfolk MPs, including Norwich North MP Dr Ian Gibson, will ask the Culture Secretary about the rumours. Earlier, I asked Dr Gibson if he could throw any more light on the situation.
Well, the allegation is that at a Norwich versus Derby game, at half-time, there was a correlation with a huge investment of gambling money into some aspect of the game, the result or whatever, and that was strange. It was picked up and identified as this match.
And this was allegedly betting going on in Asia, am I right?
Yes, that's where it supposedly happens, and there must be some organisation like the banking industry that can see where money is invested just at the press of a button.
So you were at this match in question. Did you notice anything going on untoward?
No, it was just a normal football match. You know, I mean, you had your red card and you had mistakes in defence and so on, but you never suspected that any of that stuff was going on. You know, it was 10 men against 11. And it's just a normal Norwich match, really exciting events going on.
So what answer do you expect to get from the Culture Secretary?
I expect the Minister to stand up or write to me or call me in and say, yes, there is an investigation going on. We expect it to finish by whenever. You will hear. We will then have a press conference and tell the public just what has gone on, that there's either nothing in it or there's more to find out. That's what we're going to have to unravel.
Well, earlier this evening we spoke to Norwich City's chief executive. He told us he wished the MPs had picked up the phone and spoken to him directly, but said he hoped the club's name would be cleared.
Certainly I've no reason to believe whatsoever that anyone here at Carrow Road is in any way implicated. So the sooner that any investigation can be carried out and the club's good name cleared, the better.
And there'll be more on this story on BBC Radio Norfolk's Breakfast Show tomorrow morning. The East of England Ambulance Service has come under fire in the latest ratings by the Healthcare Commission. It was given a so-called weak rating. It's one of 2 trusts in the region which have shown the most notable decline. A proposal to turn a struggling school into Suffolk's first academy is already meeting opposition. Hollywell's High in Ipswich would become a publicly funded independent school, sponsored by the Church of England and British Telecom, but most teachers and governors aren't in favour. Norfolk Police have called a meeting to discuss safety concerns in Norwich City Centre. It comes after the death of top city banker Frank McGarahan. Licensees, door staff, taxi drivers and council representatives have all been invited. Troubleshooters are to be sent into one of our councils because of fears that it may be facing financial difficulties because of the collapse of the banks in Iceland. Uttlesford District Council in Essex says it had £2.2 million invested in the banks, whose assets have now been frozen.
Tomorrow morning, a team of government accountants will come to the headquarters of Uttlesford Council to look at the books and see how serious things are. The council itself has expressed surprise at being singled out. Yes, it has money tied up in Iceland,
but it doesn't have an immediate impact upon council services or our ability to pay staff or pay bills, and so it's the longer term which we are concerned with at the present time.
Uttlesford incorporates some of the most beautiful parts of Essex and Stansted Airport, but it is a small council with few reserves. The £2.2 million that it had invested in Iceland represented 21% of its annual budget. It's predicting a shortfall of £200,000. That's why the government decided to intervene.
Specialists are contacting those 10 councils today, offering to help them assess their position and assess their options and report back to us.
Up until now, ministers have refused to provide any financial assistance. They say the councils will get back a lot of the money when the banks are liquidated. But this afternoon, an MP close to the government hinted at a possible change in policy.
If the government's assessment is that 1 or 2 councils have short-term problems, they will help them with those they're sending in audit teams to look at exactly what the problem is and make sure that if they're going to help them, they're helping the right people.
There are rumours at Westminster tonight that financial help is about to be offered to those councils who are really struggling. That could be good news for Uttlesford. It could be good news for other authorities in our region, because in the next few weeks they're going to have to start thinking about setting next year's council tax. And ministers don't want to see that rising, all because of Iceland. Andrew Sinclair, BBC Look East.
Which is time to say congratulations to 2 of our local BBC radio stations. This evening, the Frank Gillard Awards, which are the local radio equivalent of the Oscars, were held in Leeds. BBC Essex got a gold, BBC Radio Suffolk got a silver and a bronze. On to the weather then, and tonight will be dry with the risk of ground frost and a low of 2 degrees Celsius. Tomorrow, after a chilly start, a fine, dry, bright day with a high of 14 degrees Celsius. The outlook, Saturday fine and dry, same goes for Sunday. More cloud there on Monday though. Don't forget, you can always get in touch with us via the website. That's all from the late team. From me and everyone else, good night.
If it had been up to me,
this presidential election,
we would have never been in this war.
Isn't like other elections.
We will never surrender. They will. I promise you, they will.
How has history shaped their stand on war? The American Future, a history by Simon Sharma. Tomorrow at 9 on BBC Two.
Hello there. Well, I'm sure the sunshine was very welcome today, even if it was accompanied by a fairly keen
northwesterly wind. There'll be some more sunshine around tomorrow, particularly across England and Wales, and with lighter winds, well, it should feel a little bit warmer as well. But warm isn't the word that springs to mind for tonight, because under clear skies with those winds easing down, it is going to turn decidedly chilly. A touch of air frost in some of the Scottish glens, ground frost more likely across central and eastern parts of England. That's where we'll keep clear skies for a good part of the night. Still a few showers for a time running in across the Manchester area into Cheshire. Cloudy skies encroaching across the northwest of Scotland, but those temperatures getting down into low single figures in many towns and cities, knock a couple of degrees off for more rural spots. So a chilly start today across Scotland, but a rather cloudy one as well. And across western Scotland, the cloud giving those patchy outbreaks of rain, most of it fairly light, but none too pleasant. We're soon into the sunshine, though, as we push southwards, down across northern England, into the Midlands, across East Anglia. There'll be a real nip in the air first thing. Temperature's still only about 5 or 6 degrees at 8 o'clock in the morning, and the low sun may be a bit tricky for drivers, but nonetheless, blue skies making it a cheery start to the day. Lighter winds, maybe just enough to bring in some patchy cloud to the southwest of England and West Wales. If you're very unlucky, you might see a light shower here, but certainly a rather cloudy start for much of Northern Ireland. Antrim and down, maybe some early brightness, but generally through the day, I think sunshine a little difficult to come by across Northern Ireland by and large, and across Scotland too, most of any sunny spells limited really to eastern areas. Across England and Wales, though, we hang on to the sunshine for a good part of the day. Here, a bit of cloud just begins to bubble up through the afternoon to make the sunshine a little more intermittent, but even so, it should feel quite pleasant with those lighter winds, as I mentioned, 14 to 16 degrees, quite comfortable, just 11 or 12 generally across Scotland and Northern Ireland, with their cloudier skies and some bits and pieces of rain here into Saturday as well. Scotland, Northern Ireland, Northern England likely to see that, but further south the sun will break through, and again 15-16 degrees. That's around about average for this time of the year, and not feeling too bad at all. Bit of a change on the way though for the second half of the weekend, with a deep area of low pressure running in from the Atlantic. Bit of an autumn storm this one, so the winds pick up, gales beginning to push in towards Scotland and Northern Ireland through the day on Sunday, accompanied by some pretty heavy outbreaks of rain. Further south the wind will be picking up, but at least for most of daylight hours it should be dry with some sunshine again. Temperatures in the mid-teens, but it's going to get very windy for all of us, I think, for the start of next week. That's all from me. Bye-bye.